but if you're already familiar with my channel, welcome back. My name is Zach Jones, although a lot of you probably already know who I am. I'm once again doing the PowerPoint on 20 animals of Britain, and it's going to be birds and mammals, not just one group of animals. But I'm going to start with my favourite animal, the peregrine. These peregrines are found in London, Britain's capital city. Now, a city isn't usually the typical backdrop for a peregrine. I mean, a more natural habitat would be somewhere wild, rugged and cliff-faced, perhaps at the coast. But over the last few decades, the peregrine numbers have begun to increase in urban areas, and they've actually adapted to live in cities because it's where they can raise their young and where they can get a bird's eye view of their habitat from buildings they live on, which act as like man-made cliffs. But also it brings in their favourite food, pigeons, because those birds flock to city centres because of the amount of scraps left over that they feed on, and peregrines act as pest control from above, keeping pigeon in numbers in balance. Of course, peregrines mate for life, and with the arrival of spring, there comes new demands on their hunting skills, demands that will stretch them to their limit, because there are new mouths to feed. And peregrines usually have like 2 to 4 chicks in a breeding season, and if they're going to grow old enough to fly the nest, their parents need to catch at least 2 pigeons a day for a month. And that will be a very big challenge for them. Of course, so as you can see, this here is a juvenile peregrine. Well, when they start learning to fly, they're like just a brownish colour, but here is the adult in full plumage. Of course, peregrines before weren't always very successful in cities. Like, urban sprawl meant their old homes were destroyed to make way for skyscrapers. But also, peregrines were very badly affected by the pesticide DDT in the 1950s because it thinned their eggshells. And of course, peregrines were the birds of prey that were most badly affected. However, after the banning of that pesticide, numbers began to increase, and peregrines have adapted since then to live in urban landscapes with churches, steeples and tower blocks, making alternatives that are the natural homes to these majestic birds. Of course, a peregrine's secret weapon when it comes to hunting is speed. But, however, on the flat, pigeons can outfly a peregrine because those birds fly at 61 miles per hour and they have huge hearts and lungs which give them incredible stamina, so peregrines are outmatched by them on the flat. So what the peregrine does is they have to climb very, very high above the city, and they use their sense of sight. And peregrines have very advanced vision, while at the base of each retina they have two sensors for vision, where humans have only one. And that means they basically have built-in binoculars and can spot their prey from well over a mile away. And once a peregrine has locked onto its target, usually a pigeon, it will fold in its wings and drop right out of the sky in what's called a stoop. And their maximum velocity can be over 200 miles per hour. Of course, as they dive, airflow rushes through the nostrils and that would explode their lungs, but peregrines have special cones inside their nostrils that slow the air rush before it hits the lungs. In fact, that design is so effective that it's now used in jet engines. But also a nictitating membrane, which is like a third eyelid, acts like a pair of goggles to wipe their eyes and clear them of debris and stop them drying out. Then, in the last moment before impact, the peregrine will swing its talons forward and then slam into its prey. The force of the blow could kill a pigeon outright by snapping its backbone, but if that doesn't kill it, then the peregrine will bite at the foot and the neck, using its beak to sort of dislocate the neck. But of course, despite their speed, peregrines don't have a very good strike rate, with only 1 in 5 hunts or 20% of their attacks ending in a kill. Of course, they are also very determined parents, and quite often they will succeed in bringing food back to their nest. But of course, they will have to do it every day, twice a day for a month, if all their chicks are going to survive. But despite their challenges and their low strike rate, urban peregrines are on the rise. To this day, more than 30 of the world's fastest animals now soar over London, making that the second largest population of urban peregrines, first one going to New York. And of course, if you are ever in a city that has peregrines, always keep your eyes out for them. But also, another thing that is one of the reasons why the peregrine is my favourite animal is that in the medieval era, with the sports of falconry, the peregrine was the second bird that was most commonly flied. And of course, the male was flown by the squire, and the female was flown by the prince, which gave her the name Falcon Gentle. But yeah, if you want to hear more about my facts on the peregrine, then just look for my other video on that. Of course, this is where you can see them in Britain. Of course, they're found all over the world, peregrines, but of course in Britain you can see them almost anywhere. But some of the best places I know of are Cheddar Gorge in southern England, the coastlines of Wales, and of course cities like London or Manchester. The next animal I'm going to show you is one of our most fearless predators, and it has an attitude that's well beyond its size. It is the stoat. Now, the stoat is in the Weasel-Family, the same group as otters, badgers, and wolverines. And as you can see, the stoat is quite a small animal, but what it lacks in size, it makes up for with attitude, ferocity, and fearlessness, because stoats are one of the largest and top predators of Britain. And of course, they can tackle prey that's more than 8 times their own size and weight, like rabbits. And because rabbits can be quite dangerous, because they are, as you can see, they're bigger than a stoat, they're 8 times heavier, and their heavily muscled back legs could deliver a lethal kick. But stoats have ingenious methods to catch prey. I mean, they mostly do things like they can climb, they can swim, they can fit in tight tunnels, and even more bizarrely, they can also dance. Because the stoat performs like jumps and jives in front of a rabbit, and strangely, that distinctive movement seems to just put the rabbits under a spell. They seem mesmerised and don't run away. And of course, that's when the stoat just inches closer and closer, and then bang! It leaps out and finishes its prey off with a bite to the neck. And of course, it's that dance of death that allows a stoat to tackle prey like adult rabbits that are 8 times their own weight. But also, stoats mate for life, and they have about 8 to 10 youngsters called kits every season. Of course, it's usually the female who does most of the providing and raising of them, because when the kits are born, the male will go off to defend their territory against rivals, and he will help out where he can, but most of the time he's too busy defending their home, and so the female looks after the kits until they're 8 to 10 months or 12 months old, and then they can leave, they can just disperse, find territories of their own, and live by themselves. Of course, you can probably see in one of the photos that there's one stoat that's almost completely white, right there. That's down to when the winter rolls around. Stoats are quite often, when it snows, they grow white fur that allows them to blend in with their background a lot better. But for most of the year, they have a dark brown top side with a white underside, and of course a black-tipped tail. But although they may look cuddly, I really wouldn't advise trying to cuddle one, because they are in the Weasel-Family, and so they do have a ferocious side and quite a lethal bite. I mean, they could probably take off my finger with a single bite. Of course, this is their range in Britain. Now, the next animal I'm going to show you is our second largest bird of prey, and what I think is probably the most iconic, the golden eagle of Scotland. Now, although the golden eagle may not be the largest bird of prey in Britain, because that title belongs to the white-tailed eagle, which I'll talk about later, the golden eagle is without question our most iconic bird of prey. In fact, for thousands of years, this bird's image has been used to symbolise majesty, strength, valour and victory. For example, soldiers of Rome marched behind eagle standards that represented the honour of their army units. But also, the eagle's power of an image led it into much darker associations, like when it was seen clutching the swastika in between its talons on the uniforms of countless German soldiers who were fighting for the Nazis in the 1930s and World War II. But of course, another thing that shows the eagle as a majestic bird is that during the medieval era, with the sport of falconry, the golden eagle was among the two birds that only the king was allowed to fly, the second being the gerfalcon. And of course, in Britain, the golden eagle is currently confined to the Highlands or mountainous parts of Scotland, where around 440 pairs, to my knowledge, currently nest. And of course, it is possible that you could see a golden eagle out of its Highland kingdom, but you might not see one by a roadside telegraph pole or tree. Such a bird might be a buzzard. And of course, when the eagle's in flight, it can be distinguished from a buzzard from its longer head, neck, larger tail, as well as the S shape, the trailing edge of its longer wings. But also, golden eagles are one of the most powerful birds of prey. I mean, their usual prey is game birds, mountain and brown hares, and rabbits. But also, they can even tackle prey as big as a fox or even a deer, which is absolutely incredible. But in the harsher winter months, golden eagles rely heavily on dead meat, feeding on the carcasses of animals that have failed to survive the difficult conditions of the bleak mountainside. This is usually red deer and sheep. Of course, golden eagles will mate for life and return to the same nest whenever they can. The pair usually have about 2 chicks, but usually it's only the strongest and healthiest chick that will survive. The golden eagle's nest, or eyrie, is a large structure which can be used each breeding season. The pair just repair it where needed and add a fresh lining, and golden